Welcome to Seeking the Sacred Self. I'm your host, Naomi Rozak. I don't have a title yet, but what I'd really like to talk about today is the concept of responsibility. It feels like it's always been a heavy weight on my shoulders, but I've come to understand it differently. And I'd like to share more so that if responsibility is a heavy word for you, maybe you can find some more lightness around that concept today. But first, we need to define it, right? From the Oxford Languages Dictionary, the first definition of responsibility is the state or fact of having a duty to deal with something or having control over someone, like a leader or parent. And the second is the state or fact of being accountable or to blame for something. The way we think of being culpable, there being fault or being liable. So honestly, when I hear the word responsible, my mind automatically goes to duty, obligation, must take care of, the person who takes responsibility when something goes wrong. I tend to think of work, drudgery. Ouch. No wonder for so many of us that's a tough word. Maybe because responsibility has always been hard for us, whether that's to take care of everybody and everything, or being responsible for our own actions, behaviors, words, mistakes, even when sometimes we feel out of control and unable to take responsibility. And then there's others who take extreme responsibility. They're very capable, but also they might be resentful of others who don't do as much, or they feel exhausted and burnt out. We tend to think things like, I have to take care of everything. I have to make everyone happy. I have to say sorry for what I did, even if the other person doesn't take any responsibility. It's all up to me. In my opinion, responsibility is a word that's largely overused and meant to make people toe the line, do what they're supposed to do so that they don't cost the rest of the people any effort. And then the rest of us who are also working hard don't have to do any more than what we're already doing. But there's a third definition of responsibility, and this one has a more positive association. Responsibility is the opportunity or ability to act independently and make decisions without authorization. An example sentence would be, we would expect individuals lower down the organization to take on more responsibility. So there's less blame here, less fault, right? More of a chance, an idea that because there's not a lot of liability here, there's an opportunity for people to be responsible for their own decisions. What's good about this definition is the opportunity written into it. But I'd like to go further. The opportunity within responsibility is that you are able to respond. A decision comes across your desk or something happens in your life, and you are able to respond. If you're able to respond, you have response ability. The same thing might happen in someone else's life, but because of something going on, maybe they're younger than you, maybe they don't have the skills, they would have less response ability. As I share through the rest of this podcast, I'll hope you'll interpret it through this third definition that responsibility is the ability to respond. But there are factors that affect our ability to respond and make it fluctuate. When we're assigning responsibility or examining it, we have to be careful about it. Not everyone has the same ability to respond, the same maturity, tools, capacity, and so responsibility fluctuates. Some factors to take into account are age and developmental stage and intellectual ability. A 1-year-old is not able to take responsibility for as much as a 7-year-old or 14-year-old. And the kinds of responsibility are different. Generally, a 1-year-old has to feel his body's needs and emotions and communicate that to others. And when he can't, their caregiver has to be watching and anticipate some of those. A 7-year-old is learning to be more responsible for his own behavior and his own emotions. Learning to feel emotions but not hurt others with them. Learning to have some life skills and help out a bit. A 14-year-old is learning more social responsibility, learning to be a good friend, learning to take care of his own money, learning to make decisions that have bigger impact. So you can see how our physical age and our intellectual ability changes what we can be responsible for. Then there's also health and ability or disability to consider. Is someone truly able to take charge of this or that, and for how much of it? And then there's trauma. If certain parts of us have been shut down, while other people may think it should be our job to fix this or do that or act in a different way, sometimes we just can't, even if we want to. And I think I'll go a bit deeper into this in our next episode about our ability to make choices. So keep watching for that one. There are also stages of life that affect our ability to take responsibility. There are times for strong leadership, like leading a company or parenting little ones, versus a time in life when we have adult kids. If we are going through a transition, moving houses, becoming a parent, or we lose a loved one, again, our ability to respond is going to fluctuate. It goes up and down, and that's one of the nuances to consider when we're talking about responsibility. So, what are we responsible for? Please note that for the purposes of this episode, instead of talking about some obvious responsibilities or duties like finances or home ownership or taking care of your children, I'm talking about emotional, behavioral responsibility and responsibility in relationships between people. What are you as a person in charge of about yourself and how you relate to others? Hang with me for a moment before we talk about this, because one part of this can be tough. All of us have been through some kind of trauma, some kind of painfully wounding event that means at some point in our lives, and maybe right now, we are not aware of or have not been able to be completely in charge of all parts of us and all the impact we have on others. And that is okay. That is human. That is part of life and growth. So all this episode is an invitation. It is not criticism. It is not judgment. It is an opportunity to explore what wonderful things you could be in charge of for yourself. And what you'll hopefully also find is that maybe you've been taking charge of some things for others that aren't actually your responsibility. So let's paint a picture. You know, when you're standing next to somebody in line, here in Canada, the person would stand about 2 feet away from you. Everything within that 2 foot bubble of space that is part of you is your responsibility. Everything inside you, your body itself, and the words and actions that fall out of you into that space is your responsibility. In episode 17 of the podcast, part 2 of A Compassionate View of the Victim, I listed the items on the Personal Bill of Rights. One of these is, for example, I have the right to ask for what I want. Many of these rights flip into a responsibility. The right to ask for what I want becomes I am responsible for determining what I want and then asking for it. You see, you have all these needs and wants and rights, and you get to know what they are. That's the privilege that comes with being a person. You get to grow your self-awareness, dig down, and discover what you want. And then the responsibility part is no one else can do this for you. It's up to you to figure it out and then act on it. Another example from the Personal Bill of Rights is I have the right to follow my own values and beliefs. The responsibility part is I have to figure out what my values and beliefs are and then act in alignment with them and communicate them to others when necessary. That's a big responsibility and an exciting one too, because you get to choose your values and beliefs and live a unique life that reflects what you believe. It's a privilege, right? And For me personally, because so many of my values and beliefs were handed to me, this is a privilege I'll never get over. The fact that I get to choose what works for me in life, I get to choose what I'm attracted to, and I get to live the life that actually resonates with me, makes me happy, aligns with what I believe in. It's a tremendous privilege. So then, on a mental, emotional, relational level, what do we get to have ownership over? What do we have an ability to respond to? Firstly, our feelings, all of them. We get to figure out what our feelings are and tell people about them when necessary. We also get to be responsible for our needs, to figure out what they are and work to have them met by ourselves or others. And I think 2 episodes ago, which is episode 18, we talked about how to find out what our needs are. So go back and listen to that one if you don't have any idea how to be responsible for your needs. Then we are responsible for anything that we give out to the world externally, how we emote our feelings, our behavior, our effort. We're responsible for our communication, our words, and some would even say the energy behind our words and actions, the energy that our words carry. Because some words can be said and they don't have any feeling to them, and the exact same word can be said with a different kind of energy behind it, and it will affect the other person differently. So we are in charge of how that comes out to people. We are responsible for our behaviors. And we are responsible for our boundaries, knowing what they are and talking about them when necessary. This includes learning how to say yes and no appropriately, which is always a practice, right? And we're also responsible for our priorities, knowing them, and then deciding whether to honor them or not. And now we move into the relationship side of this because responsibility is relational. And when we're in relationship with others, we are responsible for how we contribute to that relationship and to figure out the appropriate boundaries for that relationship, how much we should take charge of, what belongs to us, what belongs to the other person. This is tricky, it's a delicate dance, and it has some nuance. There's 2 reasons for this. Often in relationship, we carry more responsibility than we should. We're carrying things for other people instead of letting them work through them and heal them and figure them out. And secondly, relationship is an exchange. So what we give and take fluctuates too. And then remember, our capacity goes up and down. And relationships often have some kind of common goal. Maybe we're trying to be close to somebody or we're trying to work together at something. So that might mean that one of us does a bit of extra work for the sake of the relationship and the love or collaboration we have for each other, right? And that's okay. What's important is that we bring awareness to it. So we're not carrying too much for too long. And we're not taking on something that's too heavy for us by trying to take over for someone else's feelings and thoughts and lack of communication and things like that. For example, if it's my husband and I in our marriage, I am responsible for my feelings and for expressing them. And it's up to him to tell me about his feelings or what he needs. And he also has the maturity to do that, right? But my care for him and my sensitivity to knowing him well means that even on a day he's not telling me about his feelings, I might ask about them. I'm not responsible for them. I'm just caring for him. Say he's angry, but he's not telling me about it and he's just stomping around and acting mean. It's not up to me to figure out his anger or fix it. Those are his feelings, and it's his job to communicate what he needs, which, by the way, he doesn't do this, but I'm using it as an example. But because I'm also responsible for what I feel and what I observe, and because I love him and want good communication, I might say something like, "Hey, I noticed you're not your usual self. Is something going on?" Or, "I just have this feeling like you might be angry, but I'm not sure what's happening. I can extend that invitation for him to tell me, and it's still not my responsibility to do that or to take care of his anger. It's up to him to communicate. But if this is my child who is acting out of anger, maybe even saying things that are hurtful to people or taking out anger on physical objects, I would step in a bit more. Again, I'm not responsible to fix their feelings, but I do want to guide them and help them through the moment and maybe invite them to tell me about their anger. And when they're open to it, give them gentle coaching about how they can express anger without harming someone else. That's because I have more relational responsibility to my children than I do to my husband. Number one, I gave birth to them. I'm directly their caregiver, but also they're learning. They are smaller. They don't have as many skills. I'm the adult, so I can hold a container for their big feelings because I've had a lot of practice by now. What this also means is that there are relationships sometimes where someone else should be taking the responsibility. Say, if, okay, I'm 40 years old, and maybe if this was my mother who is turning 70, if there was an example where my mother is not as healed or is trapped in some difficult patterns, some patterns that really affect me, if I have more emotional intelligence, I might be able to hold space for my mother to help her heal because I have more understanding. I have more responsibility because I know more. I can take charge of more. That doesn't mean I have to. We have a choice, but I could hold more space for her, even though usually the parent is more responsible than the child, simply because of how much learning I've done or how much capacity I have compared to her and the tools she has. But again, that's a choice. That's not something I have to take on. That's something I can choose to take on based on how much capacity I have and how much of a relationship I want. This will be different for everybody, right? So you can always have empathy in relationship. That can be one of your values where you care, but it doesn't mean you're responsible for the other person. It doesn't mean you're causing their feelings or that you have to take care of their feelings or fix them. So you can see how this takes a lot of self-awareness and consideration of the different factors to know how much you're responsible for. And remember, it's going to fluctuate. Let's talk for a minute about where we take too much responsibility. We have often been taught to be more responsible than we should be. This may be caused by a parent who would complain to us as if we were another adult, and we had to always think about their feelings instead of how we felt in that moment. We had to soothe, take care of their feelings, help our parent feel better. Another example might be that perhaps in a more adult relationship, someone said we were responsible to help them feel sexually satisfied or meet their needs for physical affection, no matter how we felt about it in that moment or over time. Or maybe we were taught to be self sacrificing, consistently putting others first, no matter what else was going on in our lives. We were taught this as the gold standard is to lay down your life and take care of everybody else. And when we're adults and we're trapped in a pattern of relationship like that, we feel stuck. We think, this doesn't feel good to me. It feels like I'm doing all the work. Shouldn't they put in some effort too? But it all seems to be on my shoulders. I give and give. There's no appreciation. Why is no one caring about me? Or it might be, why don't my needs matter? Why doesn't my opinion matter? Like, you're always asking me to do this thing, but you're never asking how I feel or what's going on inside me. When this happens, it's a wake up call to reassess what's going on inside of you, bring some more awareness to it. Where are you being responsible for something that belongs to them? Are there feelings, wants, needs, boundaries, efforts at communication that should belong to others that you are stepping in on and taking care of? Are you speaking for others, arranging for others, stepping in when others drop the ball? As an example, perhaps as an adult child, you're trying to soothe the ruffled feelings of a parent who always seems to have ruffled feelings. Remember, you're not responsible to fix their feelings. And sometimes you've tried for so long to fix them that you're exhausted and their upset feelings just keep coming. There really is nothing you can do to fix them. That's a good sign that your parent needs to be responsible for figuring out those feelings and taking action on them. You can't be responsible to make other people happy. But as I mentioned before, if you're in relationship with someone, you could use empathy and invite them to figure out what their need is, like this. Mom, I know you're struggling with how dad never helps you clean up, but I really can't do anything about that. I wonder if you could figure out what you need so you don't have to feel this distressed all the time. Maybe it would feel better to talk with him about it or set a boundary about it. Perhaps you would even want to express a boundary for her, for yourself, especially if it's negatively affecting you over time. You could say something like, Mom, it feels like our conversations are all about these things you're unhappy about with dad. That's hard for me because he's my dad, and also there's nothing I can do about this. It feels like this is a conflict between you two. I wonder if you and I could find some other things to talk about so we could feel closer. I won't be able to talk about dad anymore, and I'll need to leave the conversation if that's what you want to do. Notice, you don't judge her behavior, and you didn't tell her what to do. You just made a suggestion of what might work for her, but you stated what isn't working for you and what your need might be. You need to stop talking about that, and you want to feel closer, and how you'll need to respond if she can't adjust her behavior to what you need. It can feel really hard, even unkind, to hand someone's responsibility back to them. Your mom needs to be responsible for her feelings and figure them out. And it can feel really uncomfortable to be responsible for your own needs and boundaries and have to communicate them. Because now your mom might get angry about you, and you'll have to deal with how uncomfortable it makes you for your mom to have anger about something you did. But you're not responsible for that anger. You are responsible for your feelings. And she is responsible for that anger and for communicating about what she needs and also the original feelings that made her complain about your dad. Clear as mud, right? I know, relationships are tricky. Responsibility is tricky because we've been trained that we are responsible for everybody else, and we haven't been taught nearly enough about how to take ownership over our own things. We've been taught to be nice and considerate and anticipate what everyone wants. Or we've been taught we can walk all over people and say what we want no matter who it hurts, like having no responsibility. But we haven't been taught how to communicate responsibly or how to deal with others' feelings or our own discomfort when we finally do. Responsibility is a relational practice, you relating to yourself and you to others. And it's an invitation, an opportunity. It's the privilege we've already talked about. It's something that the more you grow and heal, you get to be in charge of all the things inside you and where you have input and impact. It's part of the healing process. Not that your duty increases, your hard work increases, but your opportunity and your ability. And as you come to recognize the privilege of it, often you learn to enjoy the process of fine-tuning your awareness of your inner world and how you affect others and how they affect you. I can say that I have a lot more fun being aware of what's going on in relationships and knowing what I can take responsibility for than I did when I was just trying to please people and take care of their thoughts and feelings and expectations all the time. That was exhausting. That was heavy. But personal responsibility is also freeing. At first, it feels weird to be just in charge of you, and then it feels relieving. It feels right, like it's meant to be this way, because it is meant to be this way. When we are doing our own work of figuring out what's going on inside us and we can actually act on it, then we feel more happy, more satisfied, more taken care of, even thriving. There's no depletion because the needs inside of you aren't going unmet. You have taken responsibility to meet those needs. And this kind of responsibility, where you actually take care of you and let other people's responsibilities go, feels like freedom. Feels like laying down weights that drag you down. You don't have to carry the burden of trying to guess other people's feelings, doing all the communication in a relationship, or putting in all the effort. So when you start to be responsible for you, relationships either naturally adjust to a better balance or they fall apart and disappear. And while that can be painful, that can also be very freeing to you. Know that I'm not advocating for you to turn a relationship upside down. Only you can take the journey of self-awareness and know how much responsibility is right for you or how much to carry within a relationship. I'm only asking you to be aware, to know what's inside you. And my hope for you would be that you could carry the lightest burden possible or no burden at all when it comes to carrying things that belong to other people. And life is complex. So know that only you can know what's right for you. But there are always more levels of self-awareness that we can find. Take a moment. Think about places in your life where you are feeling exhausted, frustrated, depleted, especially in spaces that involve other people. Where in there might you be carrying responsibility that is not all yours to carry? Are you making up for where someone isn't carrying their weight? Is there something for you to communicate? A feeling? A need? Is there a place where you could just stop so that someone else can start? It's going to take time. It's going to be tricky and nuanced. It is relational, so there's a push and pull, a give and take. But if you will own what's in your boundaries, your 2-foot space, and let go of owning what isn't yours, you'll be more free. And by releasing others to their own responsibility, you have invited them to be in charge of their own feelings, their own healing, which is only ever kind. And if they answer the call, they might be one step closer to their own freedom, too. Thanks for listening today. I know this is a tricky subject. There's a lot of nuance here, and there's so much more that could be said. There's other angles to consider. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you feel like this is bringing up something for you or you have some thoughts to add to the conversation. This is how we all learn and grow, right? So please do engage with me in my Instagram DMs or in the YouTube comments, and let's have a conversation about it. In our next episode, we'll be talking about how much choice we really do or don't have, and I look forward to digging into that with you. So I'll talk to you next time when we go a little deeper again.